This is the Mojo Story. I'm Barkha Dutt. Good evening. Our focus continues to be on the political aftermath of the Pegasus controversy, the leaks pointing towards a global surveillance scandal that many countries are grappling with. In our own country, the political aftermath of this is being felt in Parliament. Let's take a look at a big story today before we introduce our newsmaker. After the Pegasus leaks, Parliament has been stalled with the opposition confronting the government on what Congress leader Rahul Gandhi is now calling treason. Mr. Gandhi, whose name along with 5 of his aides was on a possible surveillance list, is joining the ranks of other new names, which include a former CBI chief, as well as industrialists, including Anil Ambani. The Pegasus list of targets is so wide that Mr. Gandhi is saying that a software that was meant for terrorists is now being used against citizens. This, he said, is nothing short of treason. He has demanded the Home Minister's resignation, but the government has been dismissive of the attack thus far. Even as Rahul Gandhi insists that he's not just a surveillance target, he says my phone is 100% tapped, arguing that officials of the Intelligence Bureau as well as his security detail have informed him that he is under surveillance. Meenakshi Lekhi, the Minister of State for External Affairs, is arguing that the allegations are fake, even as Amnesty International, one of the organizations that has been working on providing the data to a global consortium of media networks, is standing by its story. The matter will now shift to the Parliamentary panel on information technology that is headed by Congress leader Shashi Tharoor. Mr. Tharoor is our newsmaker on the Mojo Story today. Let's bring him up and welcome him to the program. Welcome, Shashi. Those are strong words from your leader, Rahul Gandhi, insisting that he is not merely a target, as the Pegasus leaks suggest, but a definite victim, as it were, of surveillance. How does he know that? And I'm asking you this not in your capacity as the head of the parliamentary panel. We'll get to that in a moment. But as a Congress leader, how does Mr. Gandhi know this?
Well, I think you'll have to ask him exactly what the specific indications are. But he's had multiple sources telling him that he's tapped, that his phones are being listened to, and the fact is that though he's changed phones periodically, he was on this list, on this database. And he has absolutely no reason to imagine that the phone he was using at that time was not hacked, as others have been. You must remember that those whose phones are still with them and have surrendered their phones for forensic analysis, like Prashant Kishore, have been able to establish that indeed the presence of the Pegasus virus on their phones is now a matter of record. So the fact is, Indian citizens have had their phones hacked. And pretty much everyone on that target list has every reason to assume that they were indeed hacked.
Now, of course, as a journalist, and given that 40 journalists in India, 180 globally are potentially on this surveillance list, I'm concerned, and I think that the leaks raise many questions. But, Shashi, there is an ambiguity in what we know thus far. And the ambiguity is this. We, do not know who has drawn up these lists, not just in India, but globally. Is it, what are we assuming here? Are we assuming it's the government? Are we assuming this is some freelance operative? Are we assuming it's a foreign agency? That's one unanswered and very, very prominent ambiguity. The other is that even the media organizations, 17 of them that are reporting this story, continue to say possible surveillance targets. It's in very few instances that they're actually able to establish actual surveillance. Does that take the sting out of the tail somewhat?
No. First of all, when you're talking about the Pegasus malware, the company that manufactures and sells it says that they only sell it to governments and government agencies. Not only that, they only sell it to those who are vetted. So if they're doing this in this manner, and the Israeli government has to give them permission, it's going to be clearly a very limited clientele that they sell this to. So the target list is provided only by clients, and the clients are only governments. And they then give this list to Pegasus to infiltrate. In other words, to NSO, the NSO Group is the company that manufactures Pegasus. Therefore, to say that we have absolutely no idea whose list it is academic. It's some government's list, or some government agency's list. The only question is it our government targeting our own people, or is it a foreign government targeting our people? That's number one. Number two,
But how do we know? How do we know? Let me just be contrarian here and say, how do we actually know that anybody was targeted? There is something ambiguously described as a possible surveillance list of targets.
correct.
Right? That's actually all we know for sure. In some cases where the devices were submitted for forensic examination, we know that either the phones were hacked or an attempt was made to infect them with this
Correct.
malware.
Correct. And therefore, that's a pretty good guide. I mean, in other words, if you have a list of numbers and you check only those numbers, you discover that a good percentage of those you're checking have actually been attacked by the malware. Clearly, that isn't just coincidence. And that's what I think it's important for us all to accept, that the boundaries of what is likely to be coincidental and what is likely to be merely some sort of, straws in the wind can only be drawn by a serious independent inquiry. We've been calling for a judicial inquiry because a judge would have the right, for example, to send people's phones off to forensic analysis, would have the judicial experience to weigh the evidence against the yardstick of the laws in our country and decide whether there is any case to be answered. Perhaps a judge will say that there isn't a case, but at this stage, what do we see? We have the government saying there's been no unauthorized surveillance. That leaves open the possibility there's been authorized surveillance. But then how do you authorize something when the laws of the country, both the Telegraph Act of 1885 and the IT Act of 2000, specify that you can only intercept communications on certain grounds: national security, national sovereignty, the integrity of the nation, relations with friendly states, and the prevention of commission of a crime, that last point being particularly targeting terrorists. Now, in all of those things, no one in our country would object if the government is eavesdropping on somebody who's about to set off a bomb in a marketplace tomorrow. But everybody would object if the ruling party is spending taxpayers' money to put a virus on the phone of the election strategist of an opposition chief minister. That is surely, at the very least, unethical, if not illegal. But it's also illegal for two other reasons. One is that you've got the law itself, which gives specific grounds that don't apply to a Prashant Kishore or a Rahul Gandhi. But the second is that hacking, because the definition of hacking in the law, the IT Act of 2000, is of introducing a virus or malware into a computer device, a computer resource, or a computer network. And nowadays, a mobile telephone is, in fact, a computer device. Introducing it there, if you read sections 43 and 66 of the IT Act, is absolutely illegal and punishable by 3 years in jail and 5 lakhs fine, or both. Now, in those circumstances, how on earth do you get anyone to admit in the government that they have done this? So they don't want to spend 3 years in jail or pay 5 lakhs or fine. So we've got a genuine issue that only a judge, in my view, can truly effectively look into.
There's a lot to unpack in what you've said, but let me first start with what you intend to do as the head of the parliamentary panel on IT. Who are you going to summon? What are you going to ask? We are not like the Americans. We don't have parliamentary oversight when it comes to our intelligence agencies. So how do you plan to proceed with this at the level of your own parliamentary panel?
So the committee, in fact, all parliamentary committees have the right to summon officials of the government, but not ministers. So we can call the Secretary of MITI, the Secretary of Home Affairs, the Secretary of MITI being the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and the Secretary of Telecoms. We can call them all and say, what do you know about this? Have you ordered this device? Have you applied it, etc.? But we've been through this exercise a couple of years ago when there was an earlier episode in which the Toronto Citizens Lab told a number of Indian activists that a loophole in WhatsApp had been exploited to hack their phones with Pegasus. Yeah. And on that occasion, we've had this exercise without any conclusive results. And I must say there are evident limitations, because it's entirely possible, for example, that the officials we question may not be able to answer our questions because they themselves may not be in
and that's my point. You see, everything hinges on the following. Was there surveillance? If there was surveillance, was it authorized? If it was authorized, who was it authorized by? At what level was it authorized?
And on what grounds?
And what grounds? Exactly. And therefore, the officials you're summoning may actually not know and may not be able to answer these 4 questions. And then
this is why, despite being chairman of the standing committee, I have called for a judicial inquiry, because my argument is that we all would benefit from a judicial process, whether it's a Supreme Court appointing a sitting judge to look into the matter on the basis of a complaint by a victim like Rahul Gandhi, or on the basis of a complaint by a public interested citizen, or even as a suo motu decision of the court, or alternatively of a proceeding under the Commissions of Inquiry Act, which is a legal provision under which you can actually have a judge doing this. You remember the famous Shah Commission after the emergency that conducted a very detailed inquiry into all of this. These are the kinds of possibilities that exist that would take it beyond either a government, namely in this case the executive reviewing its own actions, or the legislative, where you have, after all, parliamentary committees that are composed of politicians. Members of parliament are representatives of political parties and will obviously bring those perspectives to bear as well. So I'm saying we will do our job. We will certainly do our job, and we'll report to parliament on what we are able to establish.
What do you think what do you think a judge could achieve that you can't?
Well, a judge certainly has the power to summon witnesses at all levels of the government, to demand documents, including classified ones under sealed cover, to impose punishments and fines for non-cooperation, to ask for people to surrender their phones to its custody so that it can be forensically analyzed, and to weigh the evidence with judicial experience, all of which is beyond the remit of a parliamentary committee.
Now, supporters of the BJP make a couple of arguments. One, they point to the ambiguity that we don't actually know if there was hacking or not. Possible list of surveillance targets is too vague. The second argument, and I've been hearing what they've been saying the last few days that they make, is that there is no clear pattern that emerges from the list of targets. It's a bit ad hoc. And why would any government spend this much money, up to 1 crore per target, when frankly it could use local police, outsourced malware, freelance operators to do exactly the same? Do you have any good answer for that?
Yeah, because I don't think that any of the local cops are going to be able to find out as much as you can find out by having direct, unfiltered access to somebody's mobile phone. These days, people live on their mobile phones. They're talking to people. They're WhatsApping people. They're sending messages. They're reading stuff. So it really is, in many ways, a level of access, inside access to people that no cop or investigative agency or detective is going to be able to find in quite the same way. Secondly, there is, let's face it, there's always multiple motivations. You can have a motivation to gain political advantage at a particular moment of expediency by hacking a political operative's phone, let's say a Prashant Kishore or a Rahul Gandhi. What's he going to do next? What is he up to? What does he think about A, B, and C? You can also have a very different motive. You may want, for example, to verify that somebody you're thinking of appointing to parliament, or somebody you're thinking of making a minister, is what you think he is, and that he doesn't have any dark secrets that you didn't know about. And so one excellent way is to hack his phone. And then you satisfy yourself that he's all right. That's a different kind of motivation. Multiple motivations are possible. I mean, the journalists, you're not necessarily accusing the journalists for any crime, but you know that politicians and other figures will say things to journalists that they may not officially put on record anywhere. And therefore, listening to a journalist is a third kind of motivation, not because you're trying to prevent a terrorist offense or prevent a crime, but just for you to be well informed. All of these, however, boil down to the narrow partisan political interests of one party, the ruling party. And that is a concern that many people have. How can you spend taxpayers' money doing something that benefits one party? I mean, the whole purpose
there are members of the ruling party, including, ironically, the IT minister, before he was IT minister, aides to two leading lights of the BJP, Smriti Irani and Vasundhara Raje. Now in the latest set of names, aides to the Dalai Lama, which is in a different sort of...
And 18 people connected to Minister Praful Patel. Quite extraordinary. The gentleman who was tourism and culture minister. 18 of his people, his wife, his aides, his secretaries, his relatives, have
Do
all.
you mean Prahlad Patel and not Praful Patel?
Prahlad Patel, I beg your pardon. Yes.
I was wondering if you knew something I did, so I had to pause for a moment to hear
No,
what you
no,
had
no,
to
I'm
say.
sorry. Minister Praful Patel is my
Yeah.
colleague at
Yeah,
UPA.
I was going to
Prahlad
say,
Patel,
that one belongs to your tenure or your party's
no,
tenure. No, but hang on. More seriously, my point is that there are many people of the BJP within.
former election commissioner Ashok Lavasa. I mean,
That's
that's
in
a
a
very
different. No, that's in a
interesting,
different.
different motives. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So there are questions of constitutional sort of violations possibly that arise when you look at what's happening
And
with Ashok
violations of
Lavasa.
the right to privacy that was affirmed by the Supreme Court in the Puruswamy judgment. That's also been
Yes.
violated.
Yes, but my question was somewhat different. My question is, you said this all sort of caters to the interests of the ruling party, and therefore I was listing members of the ruling party or people close to them who also find themselves at possible receiving end of this target list. So how do you make sense of that?
Sure, you can make sense of that by the example I gave you, that you may want to verify the genuineness of some people's claims to higher office or other kinds of preferment in your party. It may not, in fact, be at all a motivation of suspicion. It may just be one of verification. So, I mean, the point is that you can have multiple motivations for doing all this. You can have a motivation if you operate in that way, which I would find reprehensible. You can have a motivation of trying to find the dirty on somebody, something you can blackmail them with or twist their arms for, saying, we have found out this about you, and we will use it or release it to the public or embarrass you unless you do A, B, and C for us. So there are so many motivations possible, Barkha. I mean, I'm not suggesting that any of these motivations has necessarily been applied by the government of India. That would be a step too far. All I'm saying is we need to investigate. We need to have an objective, independent investigation so the people of India know if any and all of these things have happened.
Newspapers like The Guardian, and I'm quoting from The Guardian here, have suggested that soon after Prime Minister Modi sort of had that famous walk by the water on the beach with Benjamin Netanyahu is when NSO sort of seems to travel to India. Do you see any basis to make that linkage? And in that case, what are we actually suggesting here? Are we suggesting that Netanyahu has something to do with all of this?
Well, the Israeli government does, as Rahul Gandhi has observed publicly today, classify this particular spyware as a military weapon, and therefore it needs to give its own consent before Pegasus can approach any government to sell that product to it. So it's entirely possible, the Guardian article implies, that it was after the two prime ministers met in 2017 in Israel that India became eligible to receive Pegasus. And it's also true that a number of defense deals went up. As we've seen on social media today, some people have pointed out that there was a dramatic escalation of several thousand% in the amount of money allocated to the National Security Council for quote-unquote cyber security purposes. And that may or may not involve expenditure on Pegasus. So given that you're talking about a cyber weapon that must be approved by the Defense Ministry of Israel, given that Israel and India's defense deals have gone up after Mr. Modi's visit in 2017, given that the National Security Council's cybersecurity budget suddenly shoots up from, I don't know, something like 150 crores to 3,000 crores or something like that, the exact numbers you can find on social media, I will say to you that you can say all this is coincidence, or you can say, well, let a judge look into this and figure out whether it is coincidence.
So you're suggesting a quid pro quo, that India signed deals with Israel in return for becoming a client of Pegasus?
Well, I'm not even suggesting that. It may simply be that both happened in parallel. India has a very good relationship with Israel on security cooperation, including intelligence cooperation, counterterrorism, and defense. Some defense equipment. There's some defense equipment the Israelis haven't sold us that we want, because they've done that equipment in collaboration with the US, and the US won't let them sell it. So there are other issues. And by and large, we have a close relationship. So it may be that the two are unconnected. Who knows? But let's also see that the people in the other countries' media who have been researching all this, and particularly The Guardian and the New York Times, have concluded that India is a client. Now, whether their sources are motivated or accurate and so on, again, let a judge establish.
Prima facie, what is the allegation that you're making as an opposition leader? Prima facie.
So, as I say, we haven't established the truth. We're saying there are enough questions raised to warrant an investigation to establish the truth as to, number one, whether India, the government of India or agencies of the government of India purchased and deployed Pegasus against people who are not known to be suspected terrorists, suspected criminals, or others. Second, whether the IT Act of 2000 was breached in the process of hacking the phones of Indian citizens. Third, whether there was an ethical violation in the expenditure of Indian taxpayers' money for the narrow interests of a particular political party. Fourth, whether the Supreme Court judgment on the law of privacy was violated. And fifth, whether from all of these any consequences could follow, because as I say, we have an act that actually prescribes a fine and imprisonment for this kind of violation, and whether the breach of trust and the faith of the Indian people that their government will look after their welfare warrants any further indictment, whether in a court of law or elsewhere in the court of public opinion. So these are all very serious issues for our democracy, Barkha, because if our democracy is going to have the playing field skewed far away from the level in this way by a government spending our money to hurt its own rivals and opponents, then I think we have some serious questions to ask about whether we are truly democratic anymore.
Okay, I want to actually take you back to the pictures of Prime Minister Modi with Benjamin Netanyahu, who is not in power anymore in Israel. And those are the famous pictures which the Guardian claims that something shifted after this moment. Now I ask you this because you before you were a politician, you wore a different hat. These allegations that we're making here could ruin India's important strategic relationship with Israel. Are you mindful of that?
Well, look, I certainly don't want our relationship with Israel to be damaged. And I honestly would not blame Israel, because Israel has sold a technology, they can tell you in good faith, because India is facing genuine threats of terrorism and genuine threats of criminal networks. And it would be therefore very useful for India to have the ability to hack those who are suspected to be either terrorists or collaborating with terrorists. And therefore, Israel can say, we are blameless if we sell you a technology that you can use for a very good national security purpose, and you use it for purposes that go beyond national security. That's your problem, that you have misused it. Why is it our fault? And I must say, as an opposition MP, I'm inclined to accept that explanation, that they have sold it in good faith and we have misused it, if indeed that's what's happened. As I say, I don't want to presume that the government has done it. I'm just saying we're pointing
do
to.
you think that this would be a stronger expose if we knew the whistleblower? What I mean by saying, what I'm trying to ask is this expose missing its Edward Snowden?
Well, I mean, that is for those who have actually released the data list to tell us how much they can tell us about their source. The implication is it is somebody who is from that company or from the Israeli security establishment, because those are the only people likely to have had access to this kind of information. Because as we understand it, the limited number of clients, some people say up to 40 governments or 60 governmental agencies in 40 countries. Those are the figures. I mean, I'm reading the media that you are, the international media.
Sure.
So it's a very limited list of clients. The only people who would have them all in one place is Pegasus. I mean, is NSO Group. And therefore, I think that
NSO Group issued a statement saying enough is enough, and they don't accept these allegations. And you've seen the denial from the NSO. Now,
no. On the contrary, the NSO chief has said, number one, that he's willing to cooperate with any government investigation,
yes.
And that he has further said that though he cannot sort of publicly confirm something, if a legitimate government agency comes to him saying, we need to check whether our software has been misused, I will cooperate. Now, if the government of India wants to act in good faith on this, all they have to do, very frankly, is to go to the head of NSO and say, we will ask you to authenticate the list of people that you have actually hacked. But the fact is, if the government itself has done this, you're hardly likely to get the government asking NSO to reveal its own culpability.
Okay, here's my last question. In this country, there's enough cynicism that A says some of the following things. Oh, all governments snoop on people, one. Two, anyone who uses a smartphone thinks that their data is not private anyway. C, and the more specific one is, the opposition is not necessarily using the smartest way to protest. The issue is too esoteric. Most people won't care. You should get up and speak in parliament if you want to. The Trinamool, for example, charging towards the IT minister and snatching away his papers isn't exactly going to win you brownie points with the public. Do you believe Pegasus will have a political cost for the government, or is it too early to say? And do you believe the opposition is choosing the smart way to get its message out there?
I don't want to be disloyal to the opposition, because the opposition has collectively decided that they would disrupt Parliament on this issue to show the strength of their feelings. My views on disruption as a policy have been a matter of record for many years.
Yes, you're not comfortable with the disruption.
And I'm not going to recant on this, but I do believe that a protest was very much necessary. And the form of that protest is what it has been this week. I would say that if the government were to agree to a formal debate on the subject, rather than the IT minister coming, reading out a statement and disappearing without taking questions, which is what he did once and has tried to do in the other house as well, then frankly, I think that we have a problem, because if Parliament is a forum for deliberation and discussion, it cannot be treated as a notice board where the government comes and announces its press release and walks out. So a discussion, if a discussion is offered, my guess is that the opposition will accept that offer.
Okay.
Many other issues of interest to the Indian public that we need to discuss: the management of COVID, vaccines, unemployment, fuel price rise, inflation, the economy,
so
the China border. There is a long list of issues.
So in some ways you might be, but in some ways you might be offering the government the perfect deflection. I'm not saying this is not important. I'm just saying there are plenty of other things that are important as well.
So we want to raise all of those things. It will be very helpful if the government, in the constructive spirit that it claims it approaches Parliament with, says, okay, let's talk. But for just coming and reading out statements, that's what the Trinamool MP was objecting to. I think that will not be acceptable. It would have to be, you listen to what we have to say and give us a reply to the objections we're raising, rather than trying to brush it under the carpet with a statement.
Okay, Shashi, we leave it there. We look ahead to your meeting that you're going to be calling early next week, and maybe sort of track what happens there and track the movement of this story. I somehow feel that we haven't heard the last of even the names that might emerge on those surveillance target lists. Shashi Tharoor, Congress leader, and as well as chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on IT, that will be summoning officials of the government to raise questions about the Pegasus scandal. Pleasure having you and talking to you on the program. Thank you very much. And to our audience, see you tomorrow, same time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you, Barkha.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.